All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast, and today's show is a ripper. We are talking about a TPC listener who has a dilemma, Ben. It's a $160,000 dilemma, and they want to know our views on how to tackle it. And we also talk about a TPC listener, 5 properties, Ben, 46 years of age, single mum, school teacher, and she's got a question around $2,000 a week. And how does that apply to her? What else do we cover, Ben?
Bryce, speaking about dilemma, we also have someone who's a good Samaritan, but he wants to work out whether he wants to turn apples into apple pie and what type of investment strategy is best for him. So that's an interesting question that we unpack today. And finally, Bryce, in what's making property news, we hear from the Housing Affordability and Supply Council. And what we're going to look at there is their report on the state of the housing market, where I will share with you the 10 recommendations coming out of that very extensive report.
10 recommendations, folks. We want to hear those. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to 2 of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. Welcome back to you too, mate. How are you?
Well, I think, mate, I'm great, and you should also be pretty happy as well. I mean, good results on the weekend. Yes. Nothing's more exciting for me than beating the Blue Baggers in a tight contest at the G, and you guys rocked up to the G the next day and got the job done against the Tigers.
We did. So, mate, one swallow doesn't make a summer. Let's see how we go for the rest of the season. I've gone the early crow way too many times. So, yep, well done, mate. Nice little kick there. So, but this week it was busy too with interest rates. I think we all just snuck through. There was a little bit of a little bit of talk around interest rates rising, but now we're probably in jawboning phase.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously, it's very uncertain in terms of where the rates are going to go, because we've still got a pretty strong economy, and we've got a government who is, governments more generally, spending a lot, and that is inflationary in its own respect. So tax cuts and all of those other things. So yeah, we aren't where we thought we'd be in terms of this narrow pathway, but we've still got a bit of time in terms of how that looks. So I think from that point of view, it is a wait and see game. It's going to be informed by the data, and the data is going to be informed by the spending behaviours of people, and that's what Evan and I really spoke in depth about on our update on Tuesday, was this whole idea of inflation psychology and what it's doing, but also the spending that's going on in the older generation. They're cashed up, they're loving the fact that they've got money in the bank and it's earning high interest, and they're downsizing, which is giving them a truckload of money, and they're just living their ideal life. They're living a lifestyle by design. But for certainly those people from 20 to 40, we've really pulled in the purse strings and are settling down, right? So I think from that point of view, that's the challenge. There's a lot of people out there who feel like they're doing everything they can to reduce that, and times are really tough for them. But there's a cohort of the population who are like, this is as good as it gets for them in terms of having 10 or 20 years of gainful joy, big bank balances and money in the bank, and they're obviously out and about enjoying it.
Well, to Jennifer Langton's point, they're in stage 1 of retirement, Ben. Not yet looking forward to the quiet years or the frailty years. So why not enjoy those? But we've got the budget next week as well, so that'll be interesting for a lot of people, particularly that demographic that you just talked about between 20 and 40, because all eyes will be on that, with a government that's got to be super conscious of the populist pressure to get some relief around that, but they're going to get some in July with tax cuts, and so it'll be an interesting balance to see what that looks like, the fine line that they walk, and also what impact that might have on property as well.
Well, yeah, where do we go there? Let's leave that for next week's discussion, because there's a lot to unpack in there. But there's no doubt they want to retain power at next year's election, And to do that, they've got to vote the people the money, because the people vote themselves the money. So that's the danger, in terms of what happens in democracies, and that's really the downfall over time of a democracy, is when people work out how to vote themselves the money, as Charlie Munger used to say. And so that is a big challenge. So we'll just see basically how sensible the Treasurer and the government are. But I suspect they won't be that sensible. I suspect their budget will be inflationary, and that means that we'll have interest rates higher for longer.
Just a special thanks to our community, Ben. We've closed off our survey. Stiggy closed it off last week, and we got some incredible responses. In fact, a lot of thorough responses with what people want to see and what they like and what they'd like us to change and what they'd want to see more of. So, folks, that's incredible feedback. So thank you. So each and every one of you that contributed, there will be a course that's available for you, so you all get access to that. So stay tuned to your emails. If there's any problems there, folks, check your junk and your spam just in case it's ended up there. And if there's any problems after that, just reach out to the team. Just go to info@thepropertycouch.com.au or go to our website, and there's a little button you can click to talk to our customer service team. But there was 5 in particular, Ben, that we said we're going to announce 5. And the reason Stiggy went through these 5 was largely because they answered each and every open-ended question thoroughly, gave both positive and constructive feedback. We're always up for constructive feedback, Ben.
We are.
Suggested new topics for us to chat about on the podcast, which is incredible. So we want to stay a resource for people for a long period of time. So just a shout out to Kellyanne S, Anshul S, Emily G, Jack D, and Luke L, as Ben applauds you if you can't see that, if you're not watching the YouTube. Keep an eye out for your email, folks. We're going to reach out to you. We've got that gift voucher that we want to send off to you just to say thank you very much. Everyone gets a prize in this game, Ben, but those 5 people got an extra prize as well. So just a little reminder to keep an eye on your inbox over the upcoming days for us to...
Well done, everybody, and hopefully you'll hear me better now that I've moved the mic in the right spot.
Oh, is that important, Ben, in a podcast, to have your mic up done to
Yeah,
you?
I'm just beginning, mate. I'm a beginner in this podcast.
First time on the job. So for those of you who didn't realise, Ben just dragged his mic from, imagine your wingspan as far wide as you can get it, and then bringing your wingspan into your chest. That's essentially what he just did with his mic. So, Ben, welcome back to the Property Couch. How are you, mate?
Oh, mate, good. Great weekend results. Yeah, everything went well.
Yes, very good. Hey, there's some what I want to suggest to people, and you're going to reinforce this shortly, but we have gone through this period with our More platform where a lot of stuff was being done behind the scenes that was just foundational ground zero stuff that didn't allow us to come on here and say, oh, this new thing's happened, or try this new feature, right? But now that that's done, the team at More have got some cool stuff that are coming out, Ben. So first of all, it's still free. You still get access to this, and it's a lifestyle by design app, right? Because the world doesn't need another money management app, but it also manages your money as well, Ben. But there's a few things that you want to talk about that that we've been able to layer since we've got that foundation set.
Yeah, and it's all got to do with, the power of having the as at feature on there, so you can head back in time, put some of the legacy data in there, and that's about helping you track your behavior, which obviously then builds habits for future, sort of activity in this particular space. But a couple of quick ones there. We've got the offset tracker, which is super cool. So that now allows you to put the offset balance against your loan. So if you go into borrowings and you go into your borrowings card, you'll be able to then see in the insights section there on the card in the web app, you'll see that tracking over time. We've obviously, in terms of historical tracking, we can now do expense budgets over time. So imagine if you want to go back, what did I spend a year ago? What did I spend 2 years ago on, this particular expense item or whatever it might be? It's all going to be able to be trackable for you, so you can make informed decisions in terms of how much you are spending on certain topics. In terms of speed and convenience, bulk ads, bulk edits. So now you can potentially see across all of our categorizations across expenses, income, borrowing, and assets, you now have that bulk ad, bulk edit feature.
Land that plane, Ben. What's an example of where that comes into play?
Well, certainly if you want speed, you know, and I want to have a look at the bulk edit of my expenses. So let's say I'm doing my annual review or I'm setting my new targets, right? Let's say for whatever reason you didn't do that at the start of the year and you want to potentially do that now. You can obviously go into each card and then spend a bit of time in each card and do your target. Or you can just basically bring them up into a beautiful table format and then you can just quickly work through them in terms of how much you're going to spend on what frequency, and that automatically calculates that for you as well. So that is a perfect example where you use that. So most people will use it for expenses, not so much for, you know, you're not changing or bulk editing your income or that, but certainly your expenses and your borrowings are areas you might do that. Assets, not so much, but it's also, you know, when you're onboarding for the very first time, the bulk edit feature is also really helpful, you know, where you can say, well, what have I missed? You know, when you see everything in one big card level and you can start to add all the different expense items. And remember, you can have unlimited cards under each expense item. So if you know, my example I always use is Jack and Harry. So if they're both doing swimming lessons, I can break that up. If one's doing football and the other one's doing basketball or taekwondo, I can break all of those types of things up. So that gives you some idea. Now, what's coming soon, Bryce? I always love to get our community across some of the exciting stuff. On mobile, we are building a series of new insight graphs. The first one, which will be your cash position. So based on the sum of all of the balances in your bank account, you will just have a cash position chart. And that cash position chart will track your cash position, your global cash position over time, as you basically update all of your different cash cards. So your offset accounts, your living and lifestyle accounts, any of those sub accounts that you might be operating, sums it all up. A lot of banks don't do that, surprisingly, like in terms of their banking apps. So if you've got money spread across different banks, like a lot of people do, it sums all of those up once you set your cards up. So that's interesting. Obviously, we'll do net wealth and all of those other things over time on the mobile app as well. And then in terms of the web app, this is the one thing that our property investment community wanted. The number one thing was to do a cash flow analysis, cash position against that. So yeah. That is being coded up as we speak, Bryce. So, you know, usually that type of stuff can take about a month to a month and a half. So we'll have some huge announcements to be made there. And some of the work we're doing on asking rents analysis with all of our rich data from SRP, which is our select residential property, I'm seeing some of the super cool work we're doing in terms of getting asking rents like you've never seen before. And we know some of the other property platforms have it, but we've got some really cool stuff coming up in that space as well. So that, again, will be available, and I'll let everyone know when that one is released.
Folks, if you're a property investor and you don't use more, given that it's free, the question from us is, why not?
It's going to be built for property investors. Like, we've got the foundations, to your point, right, Bryce? So by way of example, most PFMs, so most personal financial management apps, they just do budgeting and cash flow and savings. They don't do assets. They don't do liabilities well. They don't give you a global picture, right? It's not a full assets and liabilities profit and loss statement as well as balance sheet statements. We've got it all built in, and it's being built by us as property investors to help all other property investors. So
by property investors for property investors.
Exactly. So it's definitely worth having a look.
So that's the challenge for anyone listening to this. Number one, if you are a property investor and you don't have more downloaded on your phone or web app, go to more.com.au. That's MOOR.com.au. Just check it out. And secondly, if you are someone who is a property investor and you are using more, can you tell someone else? Send them a note, someone else you know who is a property investor who might not be listening to our podcast. It will definitely help them. And as we go through the journey, because remember, the app is being built for us to use. And therefore, you get to benefit from the needs that we have personally as property investors, because you get to come along for the ride. And just a little reminder, it's free. Ben,
and Bryce, just a quick. So we're building the mobile version to be sort of more on the move, on the go when you need to get certain information done. So banking and transactions and all of that type of stuff, and eventually open banking. You know, we're looking at that certainly this financial year coming. So we're making an investment into connecting all the banking pipes. So that will be quite exciting. But the web app for actually running and a deeper dive into effectively your administrative work that you have to do as a property investor. Remember, you're running a small business, so we're thinking about all the jobs that need to be done as an investor. And obviously, you get a lot more real estate inside the web app to be able to put all of those insights and actionable points and jobs to be done in there. So that's the way in which we'll look at the world. So if you haven't checked out the web app version, same credentials and login, it's just basically two different windows. And that's the way in which we're going to build the initial phase of this, and then try and build more and more of the functionality into the mobile app over time. But we obviously have a need right now where we've got tens of thousands of people using the platform, and the web app gives you more of that sort of granular, detailed, and we can do a lot more analysis for you inside there. So that's why if you checked out the mobile, really good for on the go, money smarts, all that type of stuff, and some good dashboards and insights around spending, expenses dashboard and so forth. But if you go into the web version, it's unpacked in a more detailed way. So just a little heads up for beginners.
And we're always looking for insights that we can put in that platform that can add value to the property investor community, that they can get access to, that they can't get access to anywhere else as well.
Yeah,
so there's always opportunities for value add. Hey, just a quick one as we close out this, Ben, for housekeeping is people are getting lots of messages on Insta. So I just want to shout out to them. Thanks for that. I'm seeing them. Even if I take a little while to reply to you. They will come in upcoming episodes, as long as the questions are community-based questions, not too narrow and too specific to the individual, Ben. And there is also a life hack today that is crowdsourced via the interaction from Instagram. So you'll see that too. Hey, my Mindset Minute theme today, Ben, is I want to set up a bit of a paradigm and a mindset for what we're going to talk about today, but also for folks. Andy, my wife, Andrea, sent me something yesterday from the Nurtured First on Instagram, right? So as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought it was a really perfect mindset minute for this week, as it applies to many areas. But I'll read it out, and then you and I will discuss it at the end, Ben. But it said this: today I was on a boat with my husband. I was scared. The waves were really big, and I haven't been on a boat in the ocean in a long time. My husband and his friends saw me looking seasick and afraid and said, "Just focus your eyes on the captain. As long as he looks calm, you know you're in safe hands." So for the 30-minute boat ride on the open sea, I glued my eyes to the captain. I watched him navigate the waves with ease. I listened as he said, "There's quite a few waves today, but it's okay, folks. I've navigated much bigger waves." As I looked at the captain as my calm leader, I couldn't help but think how similar this is to parenting. A few weeks ago, one of my kids was having a hard time. She was crying in my arms. Everything in life felt like too much. She came and told me what happened, and I saw her scanning my face. The question she was asking was, "Can you be my calm leader? Can I look to you to help me on these stormy seas?" Just like I don't know anything about being on the sea, my little kids are still learning what it means to be humans with big emotions. They look to me to help guide them back to safety. Just like the captain narrated out loud what he was doing and told us that he'd been in these waves before, we can do the same for our little ones. I know this is really hard. This feels new and a bit scary, and I'm right here with you. I've been here before, and you don't have to go through this alone. Imagine the captain started to become frantic. If he was stressed, yelling, or pacing the ship, it would have been so much more difficult to regulate my anxiety. But instead, watching him confident and hearing his voice assuring us changed everything. Sure, my ocean anxiety was still there, but I knew I had a captain that would navigate the boat safely. So, Ben, not bad, right? Focus on the captain. But here's other applications that I was reflecting on, right? In parenting, Andrew and I have discussed that with the kids. I think it's a wonderful metaphor for parenting. But what about leaders that you look for in your workplace? What about if you're navigating personal relationships and someone's been there, done that? What if you're talking to medical professionals and you've got something happening in your body and they are calm and relaxed because they've seen this before? What if you're dealing with mentors? But of course, Ben, the same applies when you're investing. When you go through the GFC, when you go through something like what happens with COVID, one of our goals through COVID, Ben, and if you go back and listen to our back catalogue, some people going back and going through the back catalogue, the hope is, the very hope is that when you listen to those episodes, we were displaying the role of the captain who'd been through the seas before. Because I can say personally, Ben, and I'll throw it to you shortly, when the GFC came, I was probably more the captain who was frantic and stressed and pacing the ship than I was when we went through COVID, because it was the first one that I'd experienced. I didn't know what the waves were coming. I didn't know how bad it was going to be. But then obviously as you go through the journey and you experience a few more cycles. So I guess that's the mindset they want to set up for everyone this week, is whenever you're unsure, look to see who you can have as someone who's been through those waves before, who can be the captain and can help you guide you through those stormy seas.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from history about whether we've been through these types of events versus people saying, oh no, this time it's different. There's not too many times through history where you can really, significantly say that. Now, we know that obviously the industrial age changed a lot, improved a lot of people's lives, took a lot of people out of poverty. I'm a believer that AI is going to also be a significant platform shift. So that is probably the time. But in terms of human interest, human behaviour, and the stories that we tell ourselves, some of those stories, are based in religious, groundings or values groundings. They go back thousands of years, and so those things are, don't often change, and that's ultimately where we find, in a lot of cases, great patience, great thoughts, great internal connections. But in other cases, we also can sometimes find conflict as well. So I think from where I sit with a story like this is, for those that are close to and connected to you, what I like about this story is if they have experience in this particular space, whether it's a lived experience or, that's backed up by a substantial amount of scientific validated evidence as well, then I tend to, gravitate to the data and the proof inside that story. And I think there's a lot to be said for that if you can portray that confidence, then hopefully you can release a certain amount of stress and anxiety for those people. They've still got to learn those practices, but the more that we remain patient and calm, I get animated, as you know, when I see governments doing dumb things, when I see people doing dumb things with money, because I want the best for everyone, and so I can still have that frustration, but deep down inside, there's not too many things that worry me these days in terms of, because I've been on that journey, right? That lived experience.
100%. And this too shall pass. As you said, there are some timeless wisdom. Ben, I'm reading The Daily Stoic by Ryan Holiday. Yeah. It's cool. It's just these little snacks of Stoic wisdom that's been around for some time. Yeah. And what's been interesting about that is you can often, Stoic can often be replaced with unemotional, which is actually going through the process. It's actually not true. It's just using timeless wisdom on how to navigate the seas, if you like. And so I'm really enjoying that. So if anyone's interested in reading, I read it every morning, Ben. It takes 6 minutes to read each, because it's daily. It does it every day. There's 366. So if you've got a leap year, it still covers you everywhere. But you just go and look at the day, and then you can just roll it each year and gives you something to think about.
Beautiful.
So there you go, folks. Who's your captain going through the seas, whether it's parenting, whether it's you're going through a health challenge right now, whether you're investing, whatever it is, look for that captain and see what they're doing to work out how you should be responding. Hey, today's Q&A day, we're getting the questions from the people. We've got this first one. It's from Emma. It's a ripper, and I think it's a foundational question that I think everyone will really get a lot of benefit out. And it's a question around, should I go and get my deposit back, or should I wait for growth? So let's have a little listen to the question that Emma sent us.
Good afternoon. I've used Empower Wealth to help buy a property and feel like everything's pretty on track. I have a new partner, and he has bought a property 2 years ago off the plan, an apartment in Canberra, and it has had significant delays and is now not scheduled to be finished for another 2 more years. So at the end of next year, it will become available to move into. And it's a 2-bedroom off the plan apartment that he bought for about $500,000. And one of his friends has now said it's probably worth about $640 in the current market. The question I have is, and it's really his question. He's looking at different options at the moment, but they did offer a refund of the deposit due to the delays. Is it worth him taking that refund now and looking at buying an investment property, an investment grade property? Or should he take the profit that he's made on the property now, wait 2 years until it's built, or a year and a half now, and then sell it? And it's a difficult question because he will potentially be walking away from a potential profit of a property that hasn't commenced being built yet, or and the money that's been made in relation to that, because it's gone from 500,000 to potentially 640,000. Or is it worth him cutting his losses the 2 years that he hasn't been able to do anything in relation to his deposit, and just get it back and go and buy something in an A-grade suburb? And then I guess the final variation of that is that what if they don't give him the deposit back now? I think the grace period for taking it back has finished, but I think there's a bit of flexibility because they can sell the apartment now for more. Should he just get the money back, buy an investment property, an investments grade property, and really just cut the 2 years away as a learning experience? It's an interesting scenario, and it's interesting to observe from an outsider in, because I guess I've been lucky because I have now 2 properties which are both investment grade properties, and they're just ticking away in the background. Whereas this is kind of a tricky situation because he may want to move into it when it's built, but I don't think that it really sets himself up for future success. Anyway, just would be really keen to know your thoughts. Should he walk away from the off the plan apartment that he's waited 2 years for and go for an investment grade property, or should he try and realize the potential profit that might arise in relation to it because the market's now shifted over the last 2 years? Interesting question. Would be really keen to hear if you've got some thoughts on it. Thanks.
There we go, Ben. Fundamental question from Emma.
Yeah, love it. Okay, so let's talk about the behavioural economics that are at play here. So we're talking about loss aversion. Now, we know in loss aversion, it's 2 times greater. So the emotional and decisioning is 2 times greater to let go of a potential gain or loss as opposed it is to basically doing something. So in potentially Emma's partner's mind, there's potentially a loss aversion going on here because I really don't know what's going to happen. So that's step number 1. In terms of action points, number 1, here's the first thing you need to do. You need to validate that 640,000. What if you get a professional valuer who actually says, I disagree. My professional opinion on that as a captain who's done this a lot is telling me that it's actually about 560,000 versus 640,000. All of a sudden now the dynamics shift in terms of what it's worth. So if the friend says it's worth that, what sort of validation, what supporting evidence is going to take shape here? Because my next message here is really around one of the things with off the plan properties is it's not a profit yet. Okay, so understand that it's what's different about that versus existing property is you might have a so-called paper profit that does look good, but you can't lend against that paper profit. So there's an opportunity cost problem going on here, and that is that if I've got to wait another 18 months or the end of next year to get access to that property, I can't then release that equity until that time. So I've got a trade-off or a judgment call that I need to make here. So I want that to be really well known, whereas if we had have gone for a existing property investment grade and it moved that quickly, we would be able to lend against that equity that we've just created to potentially add, like Emma has, who's now got 2 properties, and her new fella has only got one coming, and so that's that opportunity cost thing. I want to now talk about the risk that we're talking about here. So the other action point is yep, you need to make contact with the council. And so because this developer is delayed for whatever reason, what else is in the pipeline? What other applications for additional supply of accommodation has been put forward for council approval or has been approved? Because remember, supply is the enemy of capital growth. I'll say it again. Supply is the enemy of capital growth. So if there is an additional amount of supply, and let's say another development company can come in and build far quicker than the company that's currently delayed, have a look at the specs on those properties. And is it specced up to the same quality and standard as the one that you've bought? Is it a little bit lower, whatever that may look like? Because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of specs that you can do to a two-bedroom apartment. You can do, stone bench tops these days now. There's certain stone you can't use because of health reasons. So there's a lot of different things, but there really can't be too much, what are the other amenities that you're going to be paying for as an investor? Is there pool, spas, tennis courts, and all of that other sort of stuff, gymnasiums? All of those come at a cost. So I think it's just important to understand all those types of things. So you can see by the flavour of my response here, I'm skeptical of whether that profit is going to be realised as it currently stands. But if you can tick off on there's no further supply coming, you can tick off on the idea that the economy is going to be in okay shape, and interest rates are potentially going to be coming down, and you want to see it out, well then you're just literally in the hands of the gods around what value you're going to get when when the property's finally complete. And if you move into it, we don't know 100% whether it's owner occupied because it does say move in versus investment. And if you are going to sell that property, but it's your principal place of residence, obviously we know there's no capital gains. But if it's an investment property, I want you to also find out from your tax accountant whether the date of the contract of sale represents significant, because you don't own an asset really. It's really a bit of air at the moment. It hasn't been built yet. So whether that impacts on your 50% capital gains exemption is another point. And I've got one final point there. You could potentially on-sell. Let's say you don't get the the deposit back. You could potentially on-sell your off the plan. So selling an off the plan again. But I want you to get legal advice on that. So there's a lot of homework to do here. And remember, a fully informed person is always going to make a better decision around that. So get some of that professional advice. Go and talk to your captains in that particular area. And hopefully that will give you some idea in terms of making a decision more professionally judged as opposed to a whim or a rough idea in terms of what's going to happen, because we're trying to mitigate the regret that's going to occur either way in the decision that you finally make. Bryce.
Emma, there's this show on telly that my kids are obsessed with at the moment, and it's called Tipping Point. And basically, what they do is they get a coin, Ben, and they throw it down. Are you familiar with Tipping Point?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it. Yeah.
So for those who aren't, they've got this coin. They drop a coin into this machine, and it drops down onto a platform. And you just imagine this platform's it's rolling in, it's rolling out. So the coin lands on the platform as it rolls out, and as it sort of compresses back in, Ben, the idea is that it pushes the coins forward so that it goes to the platform below, which is moving in and out, in and out. And then as those coins drop, they compress against the wall, and hopefully the goal is to get the coins to fall into the bucket, and for every coin you get $100. So over the journey, this half-an-hour show, it normally leads into the news. The kids watch it on replay on 7play, I'm pretty sure it is, Ben. What the whole goal of the game is to get one coin which has got a big red star on it. And if you can get that big red star into your tray, game over. You've just won 20,000. That's the aim of the game. Now, here's what they do at the end, Ben. You know this because you know the program. But what happens is someone's chasing $20,000, but they might have only accumulated $6,400, Ben. And they can see that this coin with the big star on it, it's probably still tantalizingly within reach. So what the host does, which is Todd Woodbridge, the half of the famous doubles duo that won every single Wimbledon doubles back in the 90s.
The Woodies, yep.
The Woodies. He entices the person to say, all right, well, if I was to give you 3 more coins, would you go ahead? And they go, oh, no. All right, what if I give you 4? Eventually, it's usually up to 5, and then they throw in a holiday to Mauritius. And it just becomes this, bird in the hand versus, 2 in the bush. This is effectively the game that Emma's partner is playing, a bird in the hand versus 2 in the bush. And which call should I make? Because generally speaking, the odds are that you probably should take your 6,400 and go home. You came with nothing. And the chances of that big red starred coin dropping is probably very, very slim, which is why they're throwing stuff at you. And I get that this is the dilemma that this person is facing right now. Ben, should I go for the big red coin, or should I take my $6,400 now? Now, this is just a fundamental thing for our community, why off-the-plan purchases are taking all the risk. Because here's the deal. You're buying something that a developer could press a button and shrink everything by 15%. They could do lots of delays. It's costing you money. But here's the thing. It's very rare for a developer to build a block of apartments before they sell it. It's rare. It happens a few times, but it's very rare, because what happens is the bank says, in order for me to lend you money to build this concept out of the ground, I want some security across the loans. So the way that we get security across those loans is we pre-sell properties so that we can use that as security to secure the finance for you. So what happens is they pre-sell usually a benchmark minimum, and then they'll leave a few towards the end of the project so they can get their profit, right? Now, the off-the-plan purchaser is helping the developer. They're working together, Ben. They're working in a symbiotic relationship where the developer couldn't build without the buyer, and so the buyer needs to commit for the builder to get going. But what happens is the cycle of greed can kick in. Because what happens is when the developer is anxious, when the concept is coming out of the ground and they're trying to get pre-sales and they're trying to convince the financer to lend them the money, they don't know what's going to happen. But then as the project progresses and they start to see cranes and towers and everything coming out and the market moves, the developer starts to go, I'm missing out on a bit of profit that I could have had if I could have funded this myself and waited to the very end. So for me, the key that's being offered here, Ben, that gives the most clues to me in reading this question is that the developer is offering the deposit back. To me, that is rare. To me, that indicates that the developer is trying to actually say, hey, look, we'll take the pain away from you. We'll give you your money back, because they've now secured funding. They've secured confidence from the bank. They've now secured that they can finish the project. And so we can give you, the foundational member of this project, the person who the future of this project relied upon. We could not have actually got it out of the ground unless you came to the party. We're now saying to you, white flag, you can have your money back. To me, that's a red flag, man. Because what it says to me is go and check the sunset clause. We've talked about this before on the podcast. I personally have been involved as a project marketer in my past life where we pre-sold townhouses in a suburb called Aspley in Brisbane's north, where the delays were being spoken about to our clients by saying, but look at the growth you're locking in. Look at the growth you're locking in. You paid this price. When it finally settles, as a panacea for the pain of being able to wait so long. But Ben, I was a captain who hadn't been through those waves before when that happened, right? So what I didn't know, was blind to me, is on the day after the sunset clause kicked in, the developer rescinded the contracts, gave the deposits back to the buyers and said, thank you for being my foundational pillar that got me to this point, but I no longer need you. And now I'm actually going to put it back on the market and sell it for a higher margin. So that potential profit that the person makes now gets picked out of your pocket and it gets put back into the developer's pocket. So I'm not saying that this is happening in this case, but I am smelling where there's smoke, there's fire. And so the key point is where the developer is offering to give you your deposit back. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, that is of nervous energy for me. So that is why, Ben, this is a living, working illustration of why the foundational pillar of this podcast is to play in the established property lane and leave the risk and the uncertainty and the anxiety and all the changes and all the stuff that comes with off the plan, leave that for other investors, because we're not doing that.
There's lots of headache and stress in that, Bryce, because if I can double click on your point, I mentioned earlier about on selling it. Now, so the developer is sort of saying, we'll give you a deposit back. But if I go there, so well, you got further demand and you can now sell it at a higher price point. You go back to the marketeers who sold the property. They don't want to resell it at the higher price point. There's no comms in it for them. They're getting a big commission on the original sale. And so they will say, oh, no, we couldn't find a buyer for you. So, what are you going to do? Just take your deposit back. The moment they get it back and they sell it at that higher price point, they get a bigger comms. So yeah, it's that's why you're not in control. And so we always, from an investment point of view, you do pay a premium for being in control, but that's why we also like to buy house and land where we've got an existing property, or when we're buying into an apartment block or town, we want to make sure that the strata's not too controlling against us, or very small blocks of apartments is part of what we're talking about here, because anyone who gains control over a site of land should be paying a premium for that. Like, ultimately, that's the whole idea. Once you get that control, it's like in business. You might have a valuation methodology for a group of shareholders, but if someone wants to take controlling interest on that business, they will pay a market premium for that. And there's a reason for that, because obviously it's a strategic investment or whatever they're doing. So the same applies here in terms of what you're trying to do. So it is a difficult one. I wouldn't want to be in Emma's partner's situation because I know that it's going to be a tough call either way. But ultimately, that's the situation they find themselves in, because they can't control the developer, they can't control the builder in terms of when they're going to start. And so it's ultimately a very, very difficult one, because there's opportunity cost, there's a time cost associated with this, and that's what's making it difficult.
So, Emma, hopefully that gives you some discussion points for you and your partner. We don't know the answer. We don't know. Should he stay, or should he get his deposit? The answer, we don't know. But hopefully, because ultimately, if he can get to the end and settle on the property and bank that profit, and you said here at the beginning of the question that he wants to move into it, so he might have had ambition for it to be principal place of residence. So there's a bunch of other stuff going on here, right? But I reckon have a re-listen to what Ben said around, is it the potential for the supply side of it, and is it still stack up? And then just ponder what I said around a lived experience. And I've seen sunset clauses enacted a number of times across the journey. So because you might be dealing with a developer who's not going to do that. And so again, we don't know. But at least you can go in with your eyes wide open. Because the fundamental question here is, do you get your deposit back, or do you wait for growth? You need to have a sense of whether you feel that growth will still be there at the 2 years, or whether. But the first port of call is go back to the contract, work out when the sunset clause is, and if that sunset clause is under the 2 years that they've talked about, I reckon where there's smoke, there's fire. Good question. Thank you for that. Next one is from Kieran. Kieran's got a question for us, Ben, around small complex versus standalone properties. Let's have a little listen to what Kieran's question is now.
Hey, Ben and Bryce. I've been thinking a bit about buying and adding to our portfolio in a way that's the best way to give back to the community and provide new immigrants, kids leaving home, divorcees and other people either just starting out or starting afresh with good quality accommodation options in high amenity locations. With this in mind, I've been thinking about investing in a small complex of villa units, say 2 to 6 units, ideally with strata titling or subdivision potential for further uplift down the track. As a general comment, I can see that this looks like a good strategy to provide rental yield in established capital city locations, for example, accommodation, which is massively in demand. But on the flip side, I can also see that there may be a downside in terms of capital growth, as there is a lot of building on, say, a 750 square metre block of land, i.e. a lot of building on a limited size parcel. Do you think that it would be better to, say, buy 2 individual homes on 750 square metres each in a similar location, or purchase a small complex of units providing more accommodation and higher yields but potentially less capital growth due to having approximately 50% of the land component. My goals, and I'm sure a lot of other people's, are capital growth first, and I always feel that it's preferable to have a property at least neutrally geared, if not positive. Cheers, Kieran.
Ben, good question from Kieran.
Yeah, great question from Kieran. There's a couple of ways to try and interpret this question. So I'm gonna there's a word in here. So should I purchase these units or small complex? So it's not necessarily build. Now, if you are thinking about being an active or a passive investor. So this is the story here, right? Passive investing or active worker. So I think he's a good human with his endeavours and his pursuit in terms of providing essential accommodation and potentially in some cases maybe even more affordable rental accommodation. Sounds like a good human. In terms of how I would approach this, it's really simple. I look at this and say, well, what is my capacity, my skill, my abilities to run a project? Let's say I'm actually building this from the ground. So I need to secure a site of land. It might have an existing house on it. I potentially turn those into a group of townhouses or apartments or whatever that might be. So that's turning apple into apple pie. That is a very, very profitable pursuit, but it comes with risk. So we think about margin of safety. So I'm not a builder. I'm not a licensed builder. Sounds like Kieran's not. So what if the builder goes broke? What if, all of those other problems? What if my funding line gets pulled like we've heard horror stories of recently? So all of those things but the return is definitely greater. Turning apples into apple pie is definitely a greater return. There's no doubt about that, but it's not passive investing. It's actually starting a business of property development and going through and building that development. Don't ever lose sight of that. The reward should be better because the risk is greater. But you can tell me about these 750 square metre blocks that I can just have the existing properties, 2 of them, and then let them do that, and I can do passive investing. I'm not going to help as many people. And eventually I can also, down the track in the next decade or two, I could also turn those into townhouses or at least, semi-detached homes. So I can still ultimately do that in terms of increasing its productive use down the track, but I can also have them now as a passive investment. And so that is ultimately the conversation that's running through my head. We don't know the scenario. We don't know what states or territories that he's looking to do this in, but they are the fundamental things. Make no mistake, turning apple into apple pie is a greater risk and it should deliver a greater return because you're taking on that greater risk, as opposed to having a passive investment that maybe down the track you would potentially look at doing something.
Ben, I'm going to have a slightly different angle on this question just to give some variety here. I'm going to assume that I've read that this particular investor is they're still in the accumulation phase. I'm going to assume that they and I think there's mixed intentions here, and I think the intentions are admirable. I've interpreted that number one, wants to help other people, right? Beautiful. Immigrant kids, divorcees, other people in some form of marginalisation is what I interpreted the original part of the question. So Kieran, triple tick for that, mate. You've obviously got a heart for people, which is brilliant. I think it's at a mixed purpose with return on investment too, because to be out in the best position to serve other people comes from your excess. So if you're in a position to have excess and additional wealth, from the overflow of that, you then get to seed that into other people. So I'm going to take the assumption from this question that Kieran's still in the accumulation phase. I'm assuming there's no big lump sum cash here that allows him to just benevolently buy properties and then be able to put them into the marketplace to those marginalised people. And I just want to remind everyone that there's 3 phases. You go through accumulation, then you go through reducing LVR, then you go into lifestyle by design, right? So the accumulation here is I need to buy the best properties that are going to get me the best return. They're going to enable me to get to the North Star that I'm after in a way that is commercial. Like we've always been talking about property investing being a small business game. It's a bit like saying I'm going to open a small business, but I'm going to offer my product to a marginalised part of the community at reduced terms, rates, prices, whatever that is, which is great. But if you can't keep the lights on because that small business is not turning over enough or getting the return on the investment for you to stay in business. That's where the mixed intentions clash. So again, the heart to help people is a beautiful thing. So what I'd probably say here is houses has historically performed better than units, right? And going forward, that's most likely to still be the case. So if you're in that accumulation phase and you can continue to build your wealth through having increased capital growth, because the reason we say capital growth first is because you want to build the wealth base large enough so that you can attract a rental income pool large enough that over time reduces your LVR. And once that LVR has been reduced, you then have this surplus to play with. So that's why I've taken the assumption here that it's not a big cash game, because if you have a big cash reserve and the funding isn't the big issue, well, then revert back to what Ben said, because the yield that comes from getting a higher yield on the land returns more cash flow back for you. Because in a perfect world, we'd all buy a block of units if we didn't have any debt involved in it, Ben, because we're getting a higher yield, get more cash flow. And the game is to eventually get to the end of the portfolio where you've got a portfolio that's spinning off cash. But there's a journey to actually get there. There's a journey of accumulation. There's a journey of retiring out the debt. And then the journey at the end is actually to enjoy what's happening. If you can cut those first two parts out, great, go for the units, because you probably don't need the growth because you're actually chasing the income anyway. So there's so many layers to this question. But if I go back to my original perspective from which I interpret this question, I think I would largely be chasing the houses for all the reasons that we talked about in the past. But therefore, we can move through those stages faster. And then if we can move through those stages faster, we talk about $2,000 a week, Kieran, as being your own home paid off, maybe 2 or 3 investment properties, combine it with super. Well, if you're determined and action-oriented like you are in this question, you might be able to get to a position where you get your family's needs sorted ASAP, which then means you can leverage and take on more. You might have 4 properties, 5 properties. You might even want to go 10 properties, largely because once the foundation is set, the next part of your goal is to build wealth to throw back to other people in the community and add value to those other people in the community. So, so therefore, without better understanding what the debt coverage is in this question, what's better understanding what your goal is and the resources you have, all things being equal, my interpretation of the question is I would go for the higher land component with the houses because we'll chase the growth, but it will come at the expense of yield, as you pointed out in your question.
Well said, mate. I mean, I like the idea. I think about the 7 grades, that we talk about financial well-being. So if he is in that accumulation phase, which we call control, then we've got obviously financial peace, and then we've got contribution. So yeah, Kieran, if you're in the contribution phase, to Bryce's point, then and you've got that luxury, you could still start with, as I said, productive use. So if you're purchasing it, you're paying a premium for the builder/developer, right? They've got their margin in there, whatever that might be, anything from say 15 to 30% profit margin in that build. If you could do that and manage that process, that goes into your coffers. So that's you turning the land from and increasing its productive use, which is then allowing you to put multiple income producing assets on it, but you still control the whole lot. So that's where, in terms of the interpretation and us not knowing the full story here, Bryce has done a great job of explaining the assumption of the accumulation phase and the boring approach that we take as passive investors. And that's how we guide most of our clients. But then there's also a hands-on approach here that may be plausible to you based on no debt or also wanting to be an active developer or a small-time developer to do that work. And that's why the decisions would be different based on those circumstances.
Good question, Kieran. Thank you. Hopefully that's benefited the rest of the community. The next question, Ben, is our third question. It's recently been asked, but I've called this from the archives question because it is a question that we have tackled before, but I think it's so incredibly fundamental. And I wanted to hear Simone's question for our audience too, because it's another way to ask a similar question, which gives us another opportunity to reinforcing what is ultimately a foundational principle for people to understand this game of lifestyle by design. So let's have a little listen to Simone's question about what exactly does that $2,000 per week actually mean?
Hi, property gurus. I've been listening to you guys for a short period of time now, but I'm listening to as much as I can, and I'm absolutely loving it. I love the way you set out your podcasts, and I love how you do the drawings on the paper. That's really helpful for me, being an oldie. 46, single mum, school teacher. I've got 5 properties. I started, quite a long time ago, and obviously they're regional, small properties, not big debts. I obviously want to get down to 3, trying to, decrease my debt. I've worked out they're going to be paid off when I'm 74. I'm trying to decrease that down to 65, obviously. But this $2,000 a week that you guys are talking about, is that in 2024, like now, or when we retire? How do we forecast what $2,000 a week might look like when I'm 65? In 20 years' time, what does it look like, and is that going to be sufficient? Obviously, as a single person, it's plenty for me, but it's really hard to forecast, inflation. Thank you so much for everything. Love you guys, and keep the drawings up, please. Thank you.
Ben, we haven't done drawings for a little while. That's harking back to the pre-COVID days.
No, that's good. You can check out the YouTube channel and all the training that we've done over the journey. There's lots of us on Butcher's paper scribbling out some ideas and concepts
as well.
Yeah, so that's very true. So check them out where you can. Hey, congratulations, Simone, in terms of, single mum, school teacher. So, I mean, what a contribution you're making to the future generation of Australians. This is a classic case. If it is to be, it's up to me, taking ownership of your future. So I just want to do a huge shout out to you for taking action and getting the job done. Look, you're in a terrific position, irrespective of whether the so-called debt retirement is 74 in terms of doing your numbers. There's a few questions in there that you had. Let's start with the first one. The $2,000 a week is obviously a target, right? And it's set in present value terms. So even though we would model that in future forecasted terms and in future value terms, we do bring that back to net present value terms. So it is the equivalent of catering for indexation, which is inflation, right? So in other words, the value of money over time goes down because of inflation or indexation. So we need to make sure that we're keeping up with the purchasing power of that money. So we always talk about the $2,000 a week that will be available in future value terms, but back to the net present value, which is the $2,000 a week. Okay, so we've got that out of the way. In terms of how this will happen for you. So there's obviously levers that we can pull. You've got the 5 properties, you want to get down to 3. So that does give us 2 properties that we potentially can divest of over a period of time. Now, the message here is simple. Try and hold on to as many of those properties for as long as you can, because when you actually do hit your retirement age and move into pension phase, you've got a lot of choices in terms of liquid money. So there are choices around accessing super. There are other choices. So what we would say when you're landing the plane at that time is how much available liquid money do you have? That's why we always set up offset buckets. And we always talk about in our models, and hopefully you've got access to our course that unpacks the book case studies that we've done. And whenever we get down to $100,000 in liquid cash, that triggers we need to do something to either sell a property, which then lifts that amount up even higher than that and pays down debt. Because the longer you can hold on to appreciating assets, the better this story gets. And I suspect over time, because when you've got money invested, it's compounding. So that's something that I would like you to sort of get a better understanding of in terms of as it's compounding. Bryce mentioned this in one of the other examples that we did earlier today, is the value of that property. The more it goes up, usually the rents will move in sync with that. And so you're able to charge higher rents, which means ultimately the debt should be able to be paid down as well. So you should be using around 2.5% to 3% in terms of longer term inflation. And that will sort of give you that idea in terms of what it's going to look like. But you're in a great position. I don't think there's anything to worry about. At 46 years of age, you've got another decade to just focus on debt. What would I do about focusing on debt? I'd try and look at my insurance policies. I'd see if I can get a bulk discount for those insurance policies. I think you definitely need to keep your properties insured, but we know Insurance costs have gone up significantly, as is obviously interest cost. So trying to get them down and negotiate those down. You should always be making sure that you are assessing your asking rents, making sure that they're at market, because we definitely know that rents are going higher at the moment. So, and it's about time, because for the last decade prior to this uplift, rents have been underperforming inflation. So we're just basically getting back to the normal trend in terms of rent charges against value of those properties. So there's just a couple of things to consider, Bryce. What have you got?
Well, again, I just want to reinforce the point that you said before. We are talking about $2,000 a week as it stands here today, so it has meaning, right? And currently, $2,000 a week is still considered more than the Australian Super Financial Association for a couple to be comfortable, ASFA, right? So $2,000 a week today is still higher than that benchmark, right? And at some point in the future, $2,000 a week will need to be adjusted to 2.5. Okay, so we get that. But the point is, whenever we're saying 2,000, it means the purchasing power of today, 2,000. And when we have projected you to retire in the future, it is actually more than 2,000 at that time. But it won't have any significant meaning, because if we say it's $3,339, Ben, you will automatically say, well, what's the borrowing power that I have right now for $3,300? So you'll lose context.
Yeah.
So we always bring it back to present value as we see it, as it comes out of our mouth. And at some point in the future, we'll need to update that to 2.5. But right now, 2,000 is still enough. That's number one. Number two, this is a really good question, Simone, and I just want to tip my hat too. A single mum with 5 properties taking action, school teacher. Wow. Okay, triple tick for that. Beautiful. Well done. We've got 4 foundational pillars that we want you to master: asset selection A, borrowing power B, cash flow management C, defense D. C, we have said from the very first episode of this podcast, is the hardest one to master, because there are so many moving parts that you need to consider. So your assumptions here that you won't pay it off until you're 74, we say, how detailed have you looked under the bonnet to work out if that's realistic? Is that still taking into account any rises in the rent that you're going to experience? Does that take into account the long-term average for interest rates? Does that take into account any, does that mean the income that you're on now based on what income you might experience as a increase over time too? So I would say that great that you know what it looks like at 74, you want to bring it down to 65, but it's not until you actually get an opportunity to play with the what ifs that give you that sort of peace of mind and clarity. So therefore, your question here, at the end, you said it's really hard to forecast inflation. Yep, get it. It's actually really hard to forecast any of your financial goals beyond 5 years, if we're honest, because of so many of the moving parts that happen in the future. So I would say to you that that planning is the next step, because if you're at peak purchasing and you want to divest down to 3 and you want to get a real line of sight on the future, just getting real clarity around your numbers really is kind of the next step. We spend most of this audience trying to get people out of action inertia, where they don't do anything. So hopefully we get them. We encourage them to buy an investment property or buy a second investment property. In your case, there is no action inertia to even discuss here, because you've done it and you've been through a significant life event as well, having to be a single parent. So, with all that said, with all that Ben said as well, I think the final piece for you is just to get some help around that cash flow planning, because that may just be the bit that unlocks it for you. That may be the bit that gives you the confidence, to Ben's point, to keep the 5 instead of going down to the 3. Or equally, it might actually give you some valuable intel and some insights that actually 3 is a good plan. And there's a bunch of reasons why you should consider the 3 as being part of your plan going forward. But folks, for the rest of the community listening to this is a really awesome exercise for you to all land the learnings here, that this is the game that we're playing, right? There is no one size fits all here.
Nope.
What applies to Simone might not apply to you. So it's not only just the accumulation of these properties over time, but it's actually finding out what money game you're playing. because that money game that you're playing is different to your neighbour, the person down the street, the property investor that's 2 suburbs away. We're all playing totally different games. And so this is just evidence of the game that Simone's playing. And she's playing to the detail that we have available to us, Ben. She's playing a really good game. So she should be really stoked and proud of herself. But for me, to answer your query, to give you the more value, and if I had a piece of butcher's paper here, Ben, I'd write A, B, C, D on it, and I'd circle the C, and I'd go get super clear on your numbers, because that's the next step for you.
Beautiful.
All right, folks. So that's today's episode with our questions. So we just want to say thanks to Emma. We want to say thanks to Kieran. We also want to say thanks to Simone. Reach out to us, folks. Let us know. We'll give you a start and build course for free for participating. I want to encourage everyone. If you have a question, you can do it on Instagram. You can do that via your voice as well on Instagram. But our preference is to go to SpeakPipe on our homepage, thepropertycouch.com.au. There's a little widget, super simple. You've just heard from our people of the podcast today how easy it is to be amongst it. So we want to encourage you to do that as well. Ben, I've crowdsourced the life hack today. This is from Cameron Tyers, reached out to me. And he said, this could be a life hack. Just copied the message from a mate. Okay, thank you, Cameron. Appreciate that. I'm probably in the minority, but I just found out that if you just slide your finger across the keyboard, spelling the letters of what you want to write, the word will appear in the text. You don't even need to put a space between the words. It does it for you. This is where the younger generation will probably say, okay, boomer. All right. So what I want to say to this, Ben, is when I first read it, I went, yeah, I've seen that before. My sister's got a Samsung. Stiggy's got a Samsung. I've seen it before. But what I didn't realize, it works with us too, Ben, with the Apple users, which I wasn't aware of. So I actually tested it last night, and you run your fingers and don't leave the keyboard, and it makes the suggestion. So you just run, yep, and then the best, and it actually works for us too, Ben.
Okay, now I've worked out what you're talking. Okay, rightio, yep.
So you just run your fingers across the keyboard as if you're writing the word. Don't take your finger off. Instead of tap, 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 just slide along. Now, it wasn't 100%, but it was 90% plus. Where it picked up old fat fingers here with the spelling. So, Cameron, good one. I did know about it, Cameron, for the Samsung, but you did help me with the Apple users. Available to us Apple users as well. So, folks, keep it coming. I'm crowdsourcing life hacks left and right. I want to hear from you. Let us know what's happening, as Cameron did, because Cameron gets start and build as well, Ben, for participating in our show. But, mate, what is making property news?
Mate, well, thank you. I'm glad you asked, right? So, governments, they play an important role. They set up the infrastructure and the laws of the land in which we go about our, quiet and safe enjoyment, hopefully. And they love a good inquiry and a new focus group and all of those things. Well, we've got one from the national government, which is the National Housing Supply and Affordability Council. Nothing like setting up a team of people to solve what is the chronic problem that we have with housing in this country. And they've recently released their State of the Housing System report. It's only a small report, 208 pages, Bryce. So but I do recommend it for those. I do recommend it for those hardcorers who really do want to get a really good granular sense of the naming conventions and the way in which the academia and potentially some of the industry look at the way in which the state of the housing system works in this country. Now, I just wanted to pull your attention towards effectively the working towards a better housing system. So there are 10 areas that they believe, so this council believe that they could improve the state of the housing system. So I'm just going to quickly read them and encourage people to think about that. Because look, as investors and small business owners in this space, we want to know the rules of the game. And if the rules of the game are going to change, that is potentially going to impact our long-term investment. So that's why it is important. I know you guys come here and get it from Bryce and I, so you don't have to read all that. We'll keep telling you about the rules of the game and also the work we're doing from an advocacy point of view through Pickup. But anyway, here they are. Number one, investing in social housing. I think that is absolutely essential. For those most in need, most vulnerable in our community, there is absolutely a need to provide them with shelter and accommodation. Number two is reduce homelessness. Oh, if there's good mechanisms to help people get, through the challenging parts of their lives and make better decisions early on in life, we should be able to reduce that homelessness. But if we don't, we've got the social housing as a backdrop. Number 3 is improve rental market outcomes for tenants. So this matters to us. Okay, and this is the agenda that we're seeing from government in regards to, there is no doubt they're saying that there will be more people, and they're calling them vulnerable people, that will need longer term rental or, effectively shelter tenure. And that then increases the need for them to have greater rights. Now, this is where, we talk about no grounds evictions and all of those different rights that are coming on here. So that's got to be delicately done, because the framework needs to get the balance right to make the incentive worthwhile for not only small business operators, but also the big end of town who get the free tax exemptions that we don't get, yet we provide basically over 2 million properties for rental accommodation. So that's a big one that we want to keep our eye on. Number 4 is improving efficiency in land use and planning systems. So again, we talk about productive use and the speed at which red tape can be removed so we can build greater density. So that's coming. Number 5, boost capacity in the construction sector. Here's an idea of all the people you're letting in. Let more tradies in and they'll build more properties for us. In terms of number 6, improving data availability. So there's obviously a disconnect in terms of the intelligence they have about the types of renters, why they're renting, and also just other general data intelligence around the configurations of the housing stock around the country. So they're doing some work on that. Number 7 is addressing regional specific housing challenges. Obviously, people living in remote communities where there's very little economic activity going on, that's always going to be a challenge. And it's always going to be very costly to be putting housing in those areas. There's got to be a discussion, an honest discussion that's held in that respect. Number 8 is in enhancing First Nation housing outcomes. I think that's a no-brainer. Number 9 is reviewing the suitability of the national housing target. So, we set this target of building 1.2 million houses in 5 years. We're going to be miles off it based on the current forecasts. And number 10, this is also very, very important for us, ensuring Australians' taxation system supports supply and affordability. And so this is this great debate around, there is a movement that believes that it's not making housing affordable. Our tax system doesn't make housing affordable. But again, coming back to what we were talking about before, if you want to have mobility of people and economic mobility, you do need a level of stock that's available for people who are renting as well. So getting that balance right. But of course, that leads to further discussions around negative gearing, capital gains tax, and all of the other taxes and charges, stamp duties and so forth that just make our housing system not efficient. So that is also going to be on the agenda. So again, they're setting it up. So now governments will start to be tweaking some of these rules, regulations, taxes and so forth. So we've just got to be vigilant. And as an investor community also, we've got to advocate for the greater good and the long-term prosperity of housing for both owner-occupiers, but also for landlords and their tenants. So I just thought that's an important document that we need to keep our eyes on, Bryce. So I think that's what's making property news at the moment.
It is an important document. There's some interesting ideas there to explore. We're going to leave a link in the show notes for that too, Ben, just so that people.
Yes, we will. Yeah, we'll do a link. So for those who want the hardcores in this world, and I'd love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and what did you learn from that, because there is always learnings to be had on both sides in terms of these conversations, right? You're trying to get the balance right. The more you move to one side or the other, there will be unintended consequences. So we need to play an active role as small business owners in this space to make sure that it doesn't go too extreme in one direction, and that will ultimately cause, as we're seeing in Victoria, higher rents for tenants in that state.
Well said, Ben. Very good. We've covered a fair bit of ground today. Again, thanks to our contributors today, Emma, Kieran, and of course Simone. And towards the end there, we had the crowdsource Lifehack from Cameron as well. So all 4 of those, again, reach out to us. Folks, just want to remind you to go to download more. If you're a property investor, the big question from us is why wouldn't you download it? So moorr.com.au, go and check it out. Mate, next week we're going to talk a little bit about the federal budget. We might even get a guest on to help us with that, who means that it'll be a nice little 3-way discussion for us as well, mate. But until next week,
Knowledge is empowering, Bros, but only if you act on it.
Act on it, folks. See you next week.